Greetings, most gracious audience. I am Sir Persevere, Knight of Tasar. Today, as I look upon our favorite legacy franchises that are left a smoking ruin, I mourn the lost potential of future good stories that could have been told with said franchises. And yet, from my point of view, a lot of these franchises are not as dead as one might think. Now, I know that Neon from Clownfish TV has become so disillusioned with Star Wars that he doesn't even care about the original trilogy anymore. And that's where I disagree with him. Ladies and gentlemen, I submit to you that in spite of the Twitter crap, in spite of Distard spitting in the face of George Lucas and pooping all over Star Wars still lives. Star Wars lives as long as we tightly hold on to the canon that George Lucas created. To me, Luke Skywalker never camped out on an island planet feeling sorry for himself and almost killing his nephew. That never happened. The story of Luke ends on Endor in the movies, and then plays out into selective parts of the expanded universe. I, for one, argue that Timothy Zahn's Thrawn trilogy is the actual sequel trilogy. Sure, it's not perfect, and it could use some tweaking in order to better fit in with the movie timeline, but when it comes to sequel trilogies, the Thrawn trilogy is as good as it gets. It is true that George Lucas was not perfect when it came to his own movies, and that he did do some retconning, which in turn gives me license to pick and choose and boldly proclaim that Han shot and Greedo did not. But the important point of all this is this. As long as you ignore everything that Distard and Wikipedia are doing with Star Wars and strictly stick with the majority of the stuff that was created under George Lucas, you can still enjoy Star Wars with a lively enthusiasm. The Lord of the Rings is a no-brainer. Amazon may try to destroy the world of Tolkien with their Rings of Power nonsense. But, as Gary from Nerdrotic has rightly observed, the works of Tolkien are not so easily tarnished by woke propaganda. And in the end, we bow to the fans for standing their ground. The world of Tolkien lives and remains even more untarnished than the purest George Lucas variation of Star Wars. And there are other franchises similarly attacked by wokeness that are still alive and well if you hold on to those stories as they were originally created and reject the woke corporate knockoffs. Star Trek, Ghostbusters, He-Man, and even Scooby-Doo are some examples of franchises that you can still enjoy in perpetuity if you refuse to watch the corporate woke knockoffs. There is, however, one franchise that I argue is truly dead. And if you saw the title of the video, then you know that I'm referring to Marvel. Of course, it's not just Marvel. DC fits the description as well. Sure, Distard is still trying its best to put out new movies and shows. And sure, there are still comics to go back and read in its library. Not to mention you can always watch the Tobey Maguire Spider-Man movies. Tobey Maguire is the GOAT. But I argue that Marvel was a franchise that was left the most vulnerable to wokeness. And if I remember correctly, Marvel was actually the first to die from wokeness, because woke activists started infecting the comics industry before the film industry started to go that route with all the other franchises. You are free to correct me in the comments below if my assessment is mistaken. In this video, I'm not going to talk about the behind-the-scenes political exiling of comic writers from Marvel and DC which resulted in the rise of Comicsgate. You can go visit Ethan Van Sciver to get caught up on that drama. And please do support Uncle E. He, along with Eric July, Justin Murphy, and many others, are paving a new path for comics. I'm not even going to delve into the woke activists who infiltrated Marvel and DC and ruined everything. I'm going to talk about the vulnerability of Marvel that already existed from a storytelling perspective. You see, ladies and gentlemen, unlike Marvel and DC, franchises like Star Wars have a beginning, middle, and end, with thousands of years of lore in some cases. That is why I argue that Star Wars isn't dead as long as you mostly hold on to the story of George Lucas mixed with a little bit of your own headcanon. That is why Middle-earth will never die. From Star Wars to Narnia, these stories have character arcs that began, reached a climax, and then ended. And this is one of the most glaring problems with so many of Marvel's characters long before wokeness even came along. The creators of Marvel decided that they were going to copy the Charles Schulz model of storytelling and basically turn all their characters into glorified ageless Peanuts characters. Let's take a look at the flagship character of Marvel, and also my favorite Marvel superhero, Spider-Man. The story of Spider-Man begins in 1962. He gets his powers from a radioactive spider bite, loses his Uncle Ben due to taking his powers for granted and not stopping a thug when he had the chance, and then learns that with great power comes great responsibility. This then motivates him to fight crime from that time forward. Good start, right? Yes, from a storytelling perspective, it's a very good start, I admit. He graduates high school, goes to college, and fights a rogues gallery of supervillains. He dates a Daily Bugle girl named Betty Brant who eventually breaks up with him. Eventually, he falls in love with Gwen Stacy, who is famously killed by the Green Goblin. He finally settles with Mary Jane as his steady girlfriend. And then his story gets rebooted. Over and over and over again. We never get to see what happens next because his story keeps getting frustratingly rebooted. Effectively, Spider-Man keeps looping through high school and college. Maybe if we're really lucky, we see Spider-Man marry Mary Jane in some of the runs, but he's basically stuck with being rebooted over and over again from high school forward. I must iterate that another part of the problem with Marvel is that they set their superhero characters in a fictionalized version of our own world. Star Wars was set in a galaxy far, far away and remains timeless because of it. The Lord of the Rings was set in a magical version of medieval Europe. The Dark Crystal was set in another world, in another time. But Marvel? Ever since Marvel got started with their stories, they made it a point to have their stories run alongside our own real-world events. World War II comes around. Guess what? Captain America is socking Hitler in the jaw. World War II was so impactful as a world event, it influenced so many of Marvel's characters, from Ben Grimm to the original Nick Fury, both of which were created as World War II veterans. To be fair to Marvel, this model of storytelling could have worked if they had stuck with their guns. For a while, the Marvel characters including Spider-Man were aging alongside our own real-world events. But then, I guess sometime in the 1970s, Marvel developed cold feet and chickened out. They couldn't bear the thought of so many of their characters continuing to age alongside our own real world and eventually dying of either old age or at the fists of an upstart supervillain who was simply too young and too strong for the aging heroes. In short, they decided to reboot everyone over and over again. Sure, we got some good stories out of those reboots, but in the end, only one truth remains. Marvel turned their characters into glorified Peanuts characters, children who would never die of old age, no matter what. And this brings me back to my examination of Spider-Man. In consequence, you have a superhero who starts out swinging alongside cars that were manufactured in the 1960s. Every time Spider-Man gets rebooted, the technology is updated to match the real-world technology of the time, while Spider-Man remains a guy in his teens and 20s. And now we see a Spider-Man, still in his 20s, swinging around with a smartphone. Now let's be honest, dear viewers. Under what circumstance was a young whippersnapper from the 1960s supposed to still be a young whippersnapper in the 2000s and go from 1960s automobiles to high-tech smartphones? Ultimately, if you come to this realization, it pulls you right out of the immersion. You realize that Marvel killed its own story a long time ago. Marvel was a walking zombie of a story that wokeness simply put out of its misery. Now, it just so happens that I do have a basic story timeline in my head that would allow Spider-Man to still be around in the 2000s. As Old Man Parker. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, in my headcanon, Spider-Man has the 1960s introduction that you see in Amazing Fantasy 15. He goes through the breakup with Betty Brant and the heartbreaking death of Gwen Stacy, and has some romantic entanglements with Black Cat. And it culminates with him marrying Mary Jane. And no, there's no one more day crap with Mephisto that results in ending that marriage. At this point, the story of Spider-Man in my headcanon starts to resemble The Incredibles. Spider-Man continues with a successful career in science into his 40s and has a son and a daughter, maybe even more kids. He even teams up with the Avengers now and again. But eventually, he gets into a fight with one of his many nemeses and saves the day at the cost of breaking his leg. He's never the same after that and has to retire from the superhero business. But then Peter's kids grow up and eventually take on the mantle left by their father. I'll even be charitable and say that it's possible for Peter's kids to find other people bitten by radioactive spiders, and that could even include Miles Morales if you want. And they form a team of spider heroes. In the end, Peter Parker is an old man with grandchildren. At this age, he reminisces about swinging above the city and wishes to have those days back despite his bad leg that never fully healed. One day, you could have somebody wearing Doc Ock's arms rampaging through the city, and this new villain takes old Mary Jane hostage. No one else is around, and old man Peter, still a bit spry for his age, quickly puts on his costume and has one last fight. He's no match for the new villain, and both Peter and Mary Jane die that day. But Peter Parker dies swinging as Spider-Man one last time. As you can see, ladies and gentlemen, my own headcanon of Spider-Man gave our favorite web-slinging hero something that Marvel never gave him. A beginning, a middle, and an end. Maybe Marvel was afraid of Spider-Man losing relevance if they gave him this arc. To this I say nay. You could have Spider-Man die an honorable death in the comics and keep him dead, but still sell his merchandise forever. But in the end, when you consider that Marvel took these characters out of sync with our own timeline, you understand that they put themselves in the unique storytelling situation where it wouldn't take much for the ideology of wokeness to blow them over. But there is one more reason, and perhaps the saddest reason, that Marvel is truly dead as a story, whereas other franchises can still live in spite of the wokeness. Not only was Marvel initially set in our timeline, but they decided to have more than half of their heroes living in New York City. Really? New York City? Sure. As long as law and order was maintained in New York City, it was easy to imagine that there were superheroes around every street corner helping the police fight the gangsters. But now, that illusion is gone. Law and order are now rejected from this formerly great city. New York City has turned into a modern Sodom and Gomorrah. New York City is a modern Nineveh. But most importantly, New York City is a stench in the nostrils of God himself. And when you have a society that no longer wants law and order and righteousness, everything falls into chaos. And anyone who is a fan of Marvel might look at New York City and say, boy, it sure would be nice if the X-Men could do something about those rioters and murderers. It would sure be nice if Captain America could throw his shield at these Antifa people. And that, ultimately, is where the illusion of the Marvel superhero falls apart, and we are reminded that Marvel is fake and always was fake. Effectively, Marvel is dead because New York City, the designated city of the superhero, is dead. I will say on an ending comment on the Marvel story that if Marvel had stuck with their guns in the first place, the only original heroes we'd be seeing in the comics now would be Thor, Wolverine, and Deadpool, and anyone else like them. All three of those heroes are either immortal or have very good regeneration abilities that delay old age. And I would have loved to see a comic where Thor, Wolverine, and Deadpool go to some place to reminisce about their friends who have since either retired or died. But for all the heroes that would have either died or aged out, it would have also forced Marvel to create new heroes. Sure, some of those heroes would have been descendants of the original heroes who probably would have worn similar costumes, but others would be completely new heroes. Marvel could have kept a perpetual story going and built up hundreds of years of lore across several different generations of characters. But instead of giving us generations of heroes, with each generation having a beginning, middle, and end, Marvel remained transfixed on one generation of hero, continuously aging them back. And all this from a storytelling perspective left Marvel wide open to the mind virus known as wokeness. If Marvel had done what Star Wars had done by giving their characters an arc from beginning to end, they still would have been attacked by wokeness. But the effect wouldn't have been as bad in my opinion because you'd be able to point out their original stories of the characters before wokeness would have ruined Marvel with awful sequels. I won't even get started on the whole multiverse thing. This video has run on long enough. But yes, Marvel pulling the multiverse crap was another contributing factor that left them extremely vulnerable to being killed off by wokeness. They should have created one overarching story and stuck with it and not fooled around with multiple versions of any given character. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video. It's an essay I had been contemplating putting forth for some time. If you enjoyed this presentation and wish to see more like it, please be sure to hit the thumbs up, share this video, and subscribe to this channel. Also, I would like to give a very special shout out to both Time Travel Master and Countess Rose. As a Christmas gift, Time Travel Master commissioned Countess Rose to create a very flattering depiction of myself and Speckles the Salamander. And I must say, it is the best work of art concerning the dynamic duo known as Sir Persevere and Speckles the Salamander. As I recall, I had just come out of a battle against the forces of Count Doom, and was immediately greeted by Countess Rose with an art easel. Speckles decided he was going to have some fun while I stood still for the portrait. Speckles, pull that tongue back in. We're having our portrait painted by Countess Rose.
But Queen Hivemind is buzzing around. I'm trying to catch her for a snack. Look, she's making horrible faces at us. You won't catch us off guard that easily, you vile Queen of Hivemind mentality.
Just go with it, Countess. Once Speckles sticks out his tongue, he doesn't pull it back in until he's caught a bug. I'll simply have to incorporate this commissioned art into future videos. Perhaps I'll put it into my video intros while the disclosures are flashing on the screen, and possibly some post-outro promotions. And now, my friends, go forth, be gracious to everyone, and may God bless you.